The peripheral nervous system. All the whitish thread-like nerves which connect the various body parts with the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord, collectively constitute the peripheral nervous system. Now, as I'm saying, the whitish thread-like nerves. In this diagram, those same whitish thread-like nerves are shown with green color. This diagram differentiates very clearly the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is indicated by the yellow color brain and the spinal cord. Whereas the peripheral nervous system, that is the nerves arising from the various parts of the brain and the spinal cord. Those reach to each and every nook and corner of the body. This peripheral nervous system is divided into two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system consists of the cranial and the spinal nerves, whereas the autonomic nervous system is again divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now let us see it one by one. The peripheral nervous system. These peripheral nervous system, they include the nerves, and the nerves are divided into two categories. As you can see in the diagram, the first one is the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves, these nerves arise from the brain. That is, they take their birth or the origin is from the brain. And the spinal nerves are the nerves which take their birth from the spinal cord. You can see in the second diagram. All the nerves which are arising from the spinal cord and going to each and every part of the body on the right and the left part. They have to reach the right side and the left side. That is why these are always in pairs. One right and one left together form one pair. The cranial nerves. Those nerves which arise from the brain are called as cranial nerves. There are 12 pair of cranial nerves. As you can see in the diagram, how the cranial nerves are originating from the base of the brain. And they go to various other parts of the body, mainly the major organs. Now, these cranial nerves, they can be either sensory nerves, motor nerves or mixed nerves. The sensory nerves, as shown here in the example, see the first diagram, the sensory where it is mentioned. It is the optic nerve, for example, which is from the eye to the brain. Then the olfactory nerve, which is from the nose to the brain. The auditory nerve, which is from the ear to the brain. So those are sensory in function. Then motor nerves is oculomotor nerve, which you can see in the diagram where the motor nerve is shown. The yellow color thread which comes from the brain to the muscles of the eye. Then the mixed nerves are the facial nerves, or even the spinal nerves are also the mixed nerves. Now coming to the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord, and these are 31 pairs in man. So the spinal nerves have two horns, the dorsal root, what is shown in the figure, and the ventral root. As you can see there, the dorsal root has a ganglion, the bulge structure, which is the accumulation of all the cytons or the perikaryones of the nerve cells. These spinal nerves are divided into 5 categories. Cervical spinal nerves, that is, in the neck region, there are 8 pairs. Thoracic spinal nerves in the thorax, that is, where the rib cage is located on the back side, you find these thoracic spinal nerves. Those are 12 pairs. Lumbar spinal nerves, these are in the abdomen, those are 5 pairs. Sacral spinal nerves in the hip region, these are again 5 pairs. And the coccygeal spinal nerves in tail region, that is only 1 pair. So in all you have 31 pair of spinal nerves. These spinal nerves, as you can see in the diagram, they originate from the two horns. That is, you have the dorsal root and the ventral root. These join together. Now these nerves, okay, the dorsal and the ventral, at the junction where the two roots, the sensory and the motor nerves separate. Here, they join together and it goes as one single nerve. Then coming to the autonomic nervous system. The nervous system which controls all the involuntary activities of various body parts is called as autonomic nervous system. Now this is consisting of a chain of ganglia. As you can see in the diagram, just surrounding the or besides the spinal cord, you have a chain of ganglia. And from those ganglia, the nerves go out to various organs. Now, this autonomic nervous system, it is again divided into two systems: parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, you can see in this diagram the yellow color part, where you can see which are the nerves which take part in the parasympathetic system. That is, from the cranial nerves, you have 4 nerves. The 3rd, 7th, 9th and 10th of the cranial nerve, they take part. Totally 12 are there. From those, 4 are a part of parasympathetic nervous system. And in the spinal nerves, you have the last part, that is the sacral nerves. From those 5 sacral nerves, 3 of them are a part of parasympathetic nervous system. Whereas the blue color part shows you the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system, the roots are in the thoracic nerves, all the 12 thoracic nerves. And in the lumbar nerves, it's only the first and the second one. They are working, the sympathetic and parasympathetic work together. That is, they are antagonists to each other. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for violent actions during emergency. Actually, they are stimulated by the hormone called as adrenaline, which is again secreted by the adrenal gland, but on instructions given from the pituitary. Then, so the sympathetic system prepares your body for emergency, and once the fright or the emergency situation comes back to normal, the parasympathetic nervous system brings back the body to normal. That is, it helps in re-establishing normal conditions after violent act is over. So, these are antagonists to each other. One example is given here. The sympathetic nervous system increases the heart rate, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system decreases the heart rate. The sympathetic system, it originates from thoracolumbar segments of the spinal cord, that is in the region of the thoracic region. And as I said, they do the work of instigating the secretion of adrenaline hormone. And these, they carry out main functions as dilates the eyes of the pupil, it increases the heartbeat, increases breathing by dilating bronchi and bronchioles, it stimulates tear secretion, it increases the blood pressure, dilates nostrils, it relaxes the urinary bladder, decreases secretion of saliva, decreases secretion of digestive glands, as well as decreases peristalsis in the gut. So these all functions are carried out by sympathetic system. The parasympathetic system, it gets activated during relaxation from stress, that is bringing it back to normal. All the effects of activation are exactly opposite to sympathetic nerves. Okay, then moving further, what you can see in the picture, a person is accidentally touching a flame. So what happens when you accidentally touch a flame? You immediately withdraw your hand from it, right? Similarly, when you enter a bright room or a torchlight is focused on your eyes, what do? The immediate reaction would be you would blink your eyes or close your eyes to avoid bright light entering into the eye. That is the first reaction. So, such reactions which are spontaneous, involuntary and automatic, they without any involvement of the brain, and these reactions are in response to a stimulus. They are called as reflex actions. Now these reflex actions, they can be categorized into two groups, voluntary and involuntary. The voluntary actions are those which are controlled by our willpower. They are controlled by our willpower. They are not spontaneous. They are not automatic also. For one type of stimulus, the response of various people can vary. That is, for example, if there are 4 people and all 4 people see a snake, but in different situations. One person may think, person A, for example, may think, of killing the snake. He is brave enough, he may think of killing the snake. The second person may feel like he is totally lost, so he starts screaming, yelling, and searching for help. Whereas the third person may run away from there without making any issue. So different people will react to in different ways to the situations. And all these voluntary actions, they are sent to the brain. That is, the messages or the signals what you get for these actions, they are passed on to the brain. The message comes to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord to the brain gives the response. So those are voluntary actions. And the involuntary actions are the reflex actions. They are not under the control of a willpower. They are spontaneous, they are automatic. And always you will find the same response for a particular type of stimulus. The same example we'll take. When you touch a hot object, immediately you withdraw away your hand. And in this case, there is no involvement at all of the brain. It is only the spinal cord. So the messages are not sent up to the brain, but the responses come directly back from the spinal cord. Examples are shown there in the diagram for you. Heartbeat. You cannot tell your heartbeat stop beating for a few minutes or few seconds. Then breathing, choking, these are all reflexes. Now all these reflexes, which are involuntary actions, and they are not under the control of our willpower, they can be classified into conditioned and unconditioned. But before going further to it, let us see in detail what is a reflex arc. The path covered by the impulse from receptor to the effector through sensory nerve fibers, which becomes a part of the central nervous system. And the motor nerves is known as reflex arc. That is, in this sequence of diagrams, you will understand what is reflex arc. Now see this diagram. It shows you that a person is accidentally touching a fire or a flame. So, what happens in that case? In the reflex arc, it is divided into 5 parts. The first one here is a receptor. You can see when the flame is coming in contact with the skin, there are sensory receptors present in the skin, the nerve endings. So those sensory receptors pick up the information, the pressure, the sensation of heat, and that is called as a receptor. Then after the receptor takes the information, what it does? It sends it along the sensory neuron. You can see the red color line passing from the finger to the hand and then to the spinal cord. So that is a sensory neuron. So the impulse of heat is passed on to the spinal cord through the sensory neuron. Then from there, it passes on into the interneuron, or also called as association neuron. So when the message goes to the spinal cord takes a decision whether the information to be sent to the brain. If not, if it is emergency, it gives the reply back directly by itself. It does not involve the brain in it. So the association neuron does the work of transferring that information to the next neuron. And that is the motor neuron, the blue color line what you can see in this diagram. So the information from the association neuron is passed on into the motor neuron. And the motor neuron takes the information to the muscles, that is the effectors. So these effectors work out and bring out the response. They contract and pull away the hand from the flame. So all these parts are involved in the reflex arc. That is, the receptors, the sensory nerve fibers, then the spinal cord, the motor nerve fiber, and the effector. These 5 parts you need to understand and remember very clearly, because individually they can be asked, or it can be even the whole thing in a sequence. Now this diagram helps you to remember all the pathway along which the nerve impulse travels. You can see first, how does it move? It first goes on from the receptors present in the skin, and then it goes through the sensory neuron. It goes into the spinal cord. From the spinal cord to the association neuron, the green color, or it's also called as relay neuron. Then comes to the motor neuron. From the motor neuron, it comes to the muscles, that is the effectors. So this movement is in the form of an arc. That is why it is called as a reflex arc. This also is a diagram which helps you to understand the reflex arc. Only be careful enough to remember all the labelings very clearly with this diagram. But can you see there is one more additional term mentioned here? The sensory neuron is also called as efferent neuron, and the motor neuron is called as efferent neuron. Okay? This is another example of reflex action. When there is a tap given on the knee, immediately there is a jerk of the leg. So that is also an example of reflex action. So all these reflexes, as I said, they are divided into two categories, that is unconditioned and conditioned. Unconditioned reflexes are also called as natural reflexes or inborn reflexes or simple reflexes. Remember all these names: unconditioned, natural, inborn or simple reflexes. And the second category is conditioned reflexes. So the first one, unconditioned reflexes. So these unconditioned reflexes, these are inborn. The word inborn will help you to understand it in a much better way. Inborn means which is there in our body right from our birth. We don't require any teaching, any prior experience, or any other instances to make us gain these responses. Our body reacts to it all on its own. So no previous experience or learning is required. They are just transferred to the next generation. These are categorized into two groups: protective inborn reflexes, and the second one is functional efficiency of inborn reflexes. So first let us see the protective inborn reflexes. The protective inborn reflexes example is coughing, sneezing. Now why these are protective? Because they help to protect our body. Immediately when you sense or inhale some dust, you sneeze, so that all the germs or whatever dust particles, foreign substances are there in your respiratory tract, they are pushed out with great force. So it's trying to remove out the dirt from the body. So that is sneezing. That is in a way to protect your respiratory tract. Or else if it enters inside, it can cause infection. Coughing also is in the same manner a protective mechanism, wherein whatever dust or any foreign particle has entered or caught up in your throat, you try to throw it out. And functional efficiency, peristalsis, as you start chewing the food in the mouth, immediately you start swallowing it. What is there at the tip, what you have just taken into the mouth, you can spit it out. But what is already chewed for a long time, it's very difficult to spit it out. You tend to swallow the major portion of it. So that is to help in increasing the capability or the function of digestion. And in the same manner, salivation. Salivation helps to increase the capacity of digesting food. Then coming to conditioned reflexes. Some of the reflexes, what you can see in the body, those are not inborn. They are learnt by a human being in the course of its lifetime. These can be also lost easily when the person is not in continuous habit or continuous workout on that particular sequence. So they can be lost or they can be forgotten. These responses are different for different organisms. They are not the same for each person. And to prove this, there was a person by name Pavlov. This person, he was a Russian physiologist, and in the year 1920, he demonstrated that a particular response could be evoked to a particular stimulus that does not occur in the nature. And for that, he experimented on a dog. What he did was just carefully observe all the labelings in the picture. In the first picture, you can see a dog is shown and there is a bowl of food in front of him. So when the dog is served the food, the dog starts salivating. So a few days the dog is continuously given food at the same time. Every day at the same particular time. So the dog starts salivating when he sees the food. So once the dog is used to that timing, then immediately there is a change in the behavior. What Paulo did was, he did not give the food but he rang the bell. The dog did not salivate. Why? Because the salivation was a response to the food. So the dog did not react to the bell. So what Paulo did next was he conditioned the salivation. What he did was he rang the bell, and after ringing the bell, he brought the food in front of the dog. So these two works were done together. Bell would ring and the food was placed in front of the dog. When this was done for a few days continuously at the same time in a regular pattern, the dog realized that when the bell rings, he is going to get the food. So he would start salivating on hearing the bell ringing because he anticipated that the food will be in front of him. But after a few days, what was done? After conditioning this, the bell was rung but no food was placed. But yet the dog was salivating. That means this conditioned reflex or the response was developed in the dog, that the mindset was created that when the bell rings, the dog would get its food. So thinking of the food, the dog would start salivating. So that is how conditioned reflexes work out. Now some examples of inborn reflexes are shown here. Please go through them. These are some examples of conditioned or acquired reflexes. Now coming to this part, the nervous pathway in reflexes. The nervous pathway, how does the information travel? That is what this is a picture of flowers. That means the eye is seeing the flowers. The sensory receptors from the eye, they take the information via the sensory neuron to the brain. The brain decides, beautiful flowers, I need to pluck them. Then the information is given to the motor neuron. Who is going to do the work of plucking the flowers? That is the hand. So the information goes to the muscles of the hand, and then the hand grips the flowers and plucks them off. So that is how the message passes on. So this is normal reflex, but there is something called as complex reflexes. And these complex reflexes, they involve all the neurons of different levels of the spinal cord to be interacting at one time together. What happens here is, one example, easiest example. When you are walking on a road in pitch dark, there are no lights, and in the dark you are walking on the road. You happen to step on a rope. You do not know what it is. Something coiled and you step on it. Actually it is a rope. But in the dark you do not know what it is. So what would be your first thought, what comes to your mind? Or your immediate reaction? You will imagine that it is a snake and you would immediately jump out of fear. So that jumping out of fear, moving away from that place, it requires really all the skeletal muscles of your body to work out immediately and to bring out that reflex. So that is called as complex reflex action. Now this diagram shows you the schematic representation of the nervous pathway. Stimulus, from the stimulus then goes to the receptors, that is the sense organs. From there to the sensory neuron. From there to the brain or the spinal cord. From there it goes to the motor neuron. From the motor neuron to the effectors, and the effectors show the response. The same thing is also depicted in this diagram. This is a diagram of a cross section of a brain. Please study this diagram properly, its labelings properly. You never know, this can be asked for drawing or even for labeling. And the same thing with the nerve cell. This is important for drawing. Thank you children. Take care. Be safe.